All right, we're recording. Um, so tell me about yourself.
First of all, hi to everyone. My name is Sergey, and I'm working for the last 7 years as an Android engineer. Actually, right now I'm working in in the United States startup called Square. Before I worked at Yandex, that's one of most biggest Russian IT company. So actually right now I'm working at Android project and happy to experiment with the CI builds, tools, Gradle, and so stuff like this. So actually, that's briefly about me.
Okay. All right. So do you work in a team? How big is the team? Like, what's your role?
Yeah, right now our team that's 5 members, 5 actually. Android engineers, 5 iOS engineers, some API team, and so not very large, but as this rather typical for the startup. My role is just Android engineer and maintainer of the CI and all the build processes of Android project.
Got it. All right. So let's just jump to the question. So the question today is to design an account settings library.
Account settings library.
Yeah, so I can give you some requirements. So we would need to have, are you familiar with Google settings, for example?
With Google? Sorry?
Google settings. So if you go to Android settings, there is a Google settings, and then you can put settings in your account. You can put like settings on device, etc. So what are we trying to build? We're trying to build an account setting library which can maintain settings for a specific user account. That means there might be multiple on device. They should be synchronized, and they should split in account-wide settings, which are going to be shared among all the devices, and local device settings, which only going to be tied to this particular account or this device.
Oh, okay. Okay. So let's start with, I would like to collect some maybe functional requirements, and after this, go further. So you say that we can store some kind of settings, and what kind of data is this just I don't know, strings, or it can be more complex data like binary data?
Let's say it's key value types for primitive types.
Oh, okay. And should this be as a, I don't know, as an app, or we are designing it like a part of Android, like a part, for example, some kind of operation system or something like this?
It's a library.
That's a library for using in
it's a third-party library. Yep.
Okay. So I'm not so very familiar with settings libraries, so maybe some functional requirements will be added in future. So what about non-functional requirements? So we actually need to store this setting somewhere at the backend side, is outside of non-local.
Right. So the settings should be divided into parts. One are local settings, which would never leave device. And second one are global, which means if you have multiple devices, they all should be shared across devices.
mode storage. And if we have a global settings, we should have some kind of authorization or something like this. Should we consider in this design, or leave it out of scope?
Let's put it out of scope. So imagine authentication, login, registration. It's magically works.
Okay, sure.
But what else we want to do? We want to make sure that we might have multiple accounts. So imagine an app which might be shared among different users. A good use case, imagine you work in some big store, right? Like grocery store. And there is an app on a tablet, and different clerks would come and use it at different times of the day. So you might want to run multiple accounts.
So Alex, what about I guess, what about privacy? What about security? Should we care about this in our design right now?
What's your recommendation?
So we actually can pay attention on one of these topics. For example, so actually from the one side, we can't actually store this privacy data, right, at the device. So from the one side. So from other side, if we can store it in the cloud, this some kind of risks too. So
right.
Yeah,
so what's your recommendation? How would you tackle it?
Okay, let's consider security topic, and we probably would implement it with some kind of cipher locally, something like this. I don't know. That's most familiar stuff that I'm familiar with a bit.
Okay. Yeah. So what you're offering is a local storage encryption, right?
Local storage encryption for the local settings.
Okay. For people who just joined, we design an account settings library.
Sorry, please repeat.
I said for the people who just joined and people keep coming, I said that we are designing an account settings library.
Okay. So, and let me know, should we design just the client side, or client and API, or client and API and backend services? Or
let's scope it to client and API.
Client plus API. Okay, and let me please know a few words about a team. How big team? How big our team, and what's the skill set of team?
Let's say we have 5 people, one lead engineer, senior, that's you, and 4 juniors.
Okay. And we do targeted some kind of long-term support, right? That's
right,
not
right.
just okay. So I think that's enough for the start, and I can start to high-level design, I guess.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah, so definitely we will have a backend part and the client part, because we have a global storage and so on. And So let's start with client. You told me that we have multiple accounts at the same device. So I would start with multiple accounts. Okay, let's have that's actually our account, and we should be able to store it locally, for example. So I would like to present some kind of probably. Okay, let's decide firstly where we should store the data at the client.
Right.
You told me that it can be, it should be key value storage with primitive types.
Right.
And we actually can choose or key value storage provided by the platform. We could choose SQL database. Both of them solutions support ciphering. We can cipher the database. We can have an encrypted key value storage. But database, the main advantage of database that we can query the data. We have a schema, and so I'm not sure that actually our key value storage is requiring all of this stuff. So at my first thought that actually encrypted key value storage will be enough.
Okay. So would you use like any specific API for this?
You mean platform specific API?
Like, would you use like shared preferences? Would you use a third-party library or anything else?
Yeah, it's as far I know. Yeah, we can't actually use just pure shared preferences because they store the data in XML. So we should store or some kind of third-party library, but that's a question about licenses, and that's a question about long-term support. So probably we could implement our ciphering by ourselves, but the team size and skill set is not is not very solid as far as I can see. So I would stuck with some solid third-party solution.
Okay. Can you like tell about any of the drawbacks of using Stripy library?
Yeah, definitely. So author of third-party solution can stop the supported of author. So you actually can't control. You don't have any control about with the code that using in library. So that's actually can be a problem in future maybe. But that's actually, it seems like a good trade-off between time to market and the time that we could spend for our implementation in-house.
Got it. All right.
Yeah.
Let's move on.
Yeah. So let's have a storage. Yeah, right now we actually have accounts. We can store the data, and now we probably want to, not probably actually, we want to send this data, our data to the backend. And how it should be done? It should be done by the user trigger, or we should schedule some kind of synchronization events or something like this? What does the product want?
Product doesn't really know and looking for your recommendations.
Okay, so then I would go with a hybrid approach. So we could schedule some kind of synchronization events, and we actually could have a manual trigger to just async by ourselves in any time we want. So I would have a component kind of sync. Oh, let's have a sync manager. This stuff should handle all the communications with backend and can schedule events for this. Mm-hmm. Okay, so also we need fetch the data when we are logged into the account. So this can be done via backend. Okay. Let's see. Third-party library, remote storage, local storage, encryption, and long storage support. So, okay, maybe you have any questions to current design.
Okay, so I'm wondering what those account boxes represent. Are those components, or I'm not quite following?
Yeah, so actually, account.
Like you have 3 account boxes, right? Then you can, okay, sync manager, we know what it is, storage we know, but what are those account boxes?
Account boxes is actually entities that each of them is representing some user data, in simple words, some kind of user ID and set of local settings. Not only local, set of settings, I mean.
Okay, so when it comes to storage, what do we put there? Would you put local settings, or would you put both?
Okay, that's a question. We definitely should put local settings. That's not question. We put in this thing in a storage, and we should actually put global settings to the backend. And okay, yeah. So in key value storage, we store in only local settings, and global settings probably storing in memory, as far as I see for now.
Mm-hmm.
Here we. The interesting thing that we could stuck with the problem then when we are trying to sync our locally changed settings with the backend, we can successfully store the local settings, but the global settings can be network call can be failed, right? So
right.
So that can be a problem for us, and so we should somehow resolve it. Probably maybe in a sync manager and doing key value storage, writing only if backend call was successful.
How would you handle offline scenarios? So imagine that we would like to modify global account settings in offline mode. So how would you address this? So imagine you did some changes and then you killed the app, and you come back and you would expect to see them in place.
Yeah, sure. So we probably could have a let's have some drawing a bit more. We could have setting. And okay, few settings in each account. And we could, for supporting offline, we should actually, what our setting could be presented. It is probably we could store it in a how we can't store this in a key value storage because setting is and probably we need a relative database here, maybe. So our setting is
so when you put like so settings boxes, that's just like a single entry, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So have key value and is global. And,
yeah. And the other approach, we could have key value storage for the global and for the local settings separately. So that will work too. And probably,
a quick question: why would you separate storing global and local settings?
Because storing if our so K is unique actually, and we could probably avoid any conflicts in a store, but we should understand what kind of settings we should send to the backend, right? So that's how we should have some kind of or boolean or some kind of place where could put and take settings, global settings. That's why I'm decided that we can store it separately.
Okay. So key is just it's a key which user provides, right? How would you identify, like for example, a global setting? Would you just keep in by a key, or would you just use ID or whatever? So I'm just trying to understand this part.
That's actually boolean.
Okay, so all right, let me maybe ask another question. Mm-hmm. If you store settings separately, right? Why would you need to have a is global flag? Is it for users to check, or is it part of API?
If we're storing settings separately, we don't need this as a global. So we have a pure knowledge that here we store in local storage, here we store in the global storage settings. So yeah, that's a variant for the probably using in a related database, but that's actually is not actual anymore if we're decided to store it separately. For example, let's start with this idea. Actually, what I'm especially don't like in this idea is that we should care about consistency and keep two storages consistent in one state for the account. This is probably a more work than we could have in one storage.
Okay. So which approach would you select? So we have two separate key value storages, right?
Yeah. So then with the only global key value storage, it will work with the sync manager because only because global settings is synchronized with the backend.
Okay. So let's talk about synchronization. So how exactly would synchronization work?
Yeah, the first part of synchronization, we schedule for example, we provide some kind of setting to the user, and he decided when in what time he want to data be synchronized. And in Sync Manager, we are scheduling some kind of jobs and doing a network call with actually to our backend. What I think that's a good time for talk about network protocols that we could use here for synchronization with backend. What do you think?
So basically, let me just see that I got it straight. You're gonna use a deferred synchronization, basically scheduling a task which would run at some point in the future, right? What if you want to synchronize settings in real time?
If we want to synchronize in real time, that's actually a good question, because a lot of other questions raised. So in this case, we could observe each account or current account with a settings changing events, and probably to reduce amount of, if user tapping very often at each setting for reducing making the network calls, we could collect changes in a batch, some kind of collection of changes or something like this, and sending it to the backend.
Okay. So how would you decide the size of the batch and the frequency at which you're going to be synchronizing your settings?
Let me know. Let me think a bit. So we could. So okay, there is one way that's not have very good user experience. We can block any UI interactions when user change one setting, but that will work, but that will not make our users happy, I think. So yeah, another thing that we could let user configure it. So it's just kind of settings with this batch size. I don't know. That's not very good UX too, because it's the name of these settings will be rather confusing for user. So and in real time.
So let's imagine situation. You have a toggle, right? And it's a Boolean. So user clicks on toggle, it switch off, and then clicks again, switches on. I can't just do it like all day long. Or there are a bunch of toggles, and user would go and just switch some of them, right? So how would that be handled?
Yeah. So one possible case that's storing local state of all the storages of all the settings, and doing synchronization when user, for example, close the app.
Okay, but what if user would not close the app for a very long time?
Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, some kind of apps doing stuff like this. You are typing something when you stop typing, and in a particular period you can see a small loader at the screen that you can sync in progress or something like this with just same time intervals. Probably.
So you're referring to throttling, right?
Yeah, there's something like this.
Okay, and what would be a good, like, how would you select a throttling interval?
I think that's actually throttling interval. It can be based on amount of events in second, for example. if user tapping very frequently, we just can debounce in it and base it on this events.
Okay, so basically, like, we have a setting library, and now we're talking about UI. That we can expand our question. So now you need to build UI, right?
Right.
So imagine user would just want to add settings, like maybe some kind of API, and then user would want to open something like an activity, and it would just bring it up or whatever piece of it. So how would you organize this UI part?
Yeah, that's time for some drawing too. So firstly, if we're talking about UI, definitely user should have some kind of list of settings, right?
Okay.
And also user can, you told me that user can create some settings. So create some setting. So we should have a setting creation screen too. And you told me about opening some new activity or something like this.
So maybe let's start from the API. Imagine that you need an API to write settings, and then you need a call to display like some kind of like settings UI for users. So let's start with API for modifying settings.
Yeah, okay. So the API would be for the modifying. Okay, let's see how it could.
So API, I mean developer-facing API.
Developer what?
Developer-facing API. So imagine you added this library to your project, and now you wanna like put some settings or read some settings and display settings to user.
So something like this, right? I should provide some kind of API of some function that a developer will invoke.
Right.
Okay, so it could be, you told me that we are storing primitives, and
let's reduce the scope to strings. So imagine you need to put a string, and you need to retrieve a string.
We definitely need some kind of ID, because all settings should have the ID to distinguish it.
Right.
And new value, probably. New value, and we should return some kind of result of operation, because update can be failed.
Okay.
And this probably for the, if we are developing third-party library, and we are probably don't want bring any transitive dependencies into it. I mean, no Eric Java, no something like this. So we probably could return our result monad or something like this with that's a pseudocode, because not
sure.
Kotlin. Yeah. And we could probably have a return or a new value of setting, or throwable, or even we can leave it in a bit other way to return just another way of, we can do it, something like this.
So a question, would it be a synchronous or asynchronous call?
That will be a synchronous call.
So basically, when you return result, what are you gonna get in this result if it's asynchronous?
Let me think.
You're referring to Kotlin result type, right?
Yeah, something like this. or just string the throwable is implicitly mentioned there. So we can then doing something like this: update settings, doing some parameters there, and after this, API could look like this: do on success. If updating of settings was successful, and do on error, and provide any.
That's basically like promise like API, right?
Yeah, something like this. So just have a lot of names in computer science or IT.
Okay. And I would assume pretty much the same for writing settings, right?
Yeah, probably.
Okay. And now imagine that you try to display settings. So how would you approach this?
I should have some kind of get settings, and here we should provide ID of account. That settings were fetched from the backend. And the same. Something like this, I guess.
Okay, so stepping back, when you update settings, do you need to provide an account ID, or would you have like an active account? And if you do, how do you manage it?
Yeah, that's actually we can do both. We can store somewhere the current account. So that's probably a good way to do it. So and implicitly we are just passing only ID of setting and taking account ID from some kind of internal library storage. And in this case, we can don't need this. But we should stuck with the one approach to make our API consistent for the developers. So let's stuck with the store and account ID in the internal preferences.
Okay. All right. Let me switch gears and talk about state synchronization. So imagine you have different devices, right? Same account, and now you have settings conflicts. So for example, on one device, you would go and maybe just like put one integer and another integer or different strings. And on the sort account, you would go ahead and just clear up settings, pretty much resetting them to default. So how would you approach this, and how would you resolve conflicts?
Yes, that's actually a problem that that facing all services like this with the state synchronization. And there is a lot of approaches there. Some of them based on timestamp of changing something of them based on which device first going online, and this set will be correct. But I'm actually like the way how the Git doing. So Git provides, when you have a merge conflicts, Git doesn't do anything. It told you, hey man, the conflicts there, so fix it. And we could actually provide some kind of UI to user with a and to let user decide which actually settings is correct right now after conflict.
Right. So it's like building UI for merging, right?
Yes, some kind of UI for merging. So one state, another state. So we can do it something like this, like Android Studio do it on something like this. I don't know.
Okay, so if we use like a three-way merging, right? At what point would you show users this?
What point should you?
So imagine like one of your devices went offline. and now you realize it's a conflict. Would you just pop up this, or would you wait until user go and navigates the settings, or any other? I'm just trying to understand at which point the three-way immersion is going to kick in.
So I think that waiting the moment till user go to the settings screen probably not a good way, because
user might never go to settings screen, right? But some account changes might be in place.
So, and basically showing some kind of pop-up during the device usage, that's not a good idea, I think. So what we could do, we could actually, that maybe sounds a bit weird, but we could send a push to the user, and with it all, hey user, you have a conflict in your settings, just merge your conflicts. And by pressing the push message, you can just navigate user to the resolving conflict screen.
What if push notifications are disabled? So there is one thing called notification fatigue. It's when you have like 200 apps and all of them sending you push notifications. So at some point you just disable them all, which some of devices like you do, like Samsung, or just clears them without looking. So chances are that user would never see a push.
Yeah, that's true. Oh, that's true. So what we could.
All right, let's move on to other topic because we ran out of time. What we haven't covered as synchronization. So like the real-time synchronization part of it.
Yeah, real-time synchronization. We discussed that we will use some kind of throttling before sync settings with the backend.
I mean, like, how would device know that a setting changed? So imagine you have a setting which which controls a background color, and I want to switch it on one device and immediately see background color change on another device.
Yeah, sure. So what we should do, we should actually keep. We actually should do it with our backend. That's obvious, and we could keep some kind of maybe bidirectional protocol of the network. I'm talking about WebSockets, and probably so this requiring that our app should be run at the other device too. So if this is working for us, if this condition is okay, but then we could just doing it with our backend and with the WebSockets. So client subscribing on some kind of WebSocket source and listening it, and another client is pushing event there. So and for the why I'm stuck with the WebSockets, there is a why I think that's a good choice for this task, because when we are passing settings change, that's not a lot of data. We just enable HTTP connection for this and doing a handshake and stuff like this for the just REST call. It looks like rather expensive, but doing it with the WebSockets seems looking rather appropriate for this. I think that's a good tool for the tasks like this.
Okay, and would WebSockets require persistent connection or not?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you should.
So WebSocket establishes connection as well, right?
Yeah.
So it's also expensive. Or is it?
Sorry?
So you said that, okay, we have HTTP connection, handshakes, which is expensive, but and keeping connections. So now we can switch to WebSockets and they're not expensive. I'm trying to understand like why WebSockets would be less expensive than an HTTP connection.
So because WebSocket requiring one connection, and when you are doing a network call and each settings change, you're doing multiple network calls, multiple connections, multiple handshakes. So that's and you are passing small amount of data. So you just switch it to the WebSocket icon safely.
Okay. All right. So that was my timer for 45 minutes. So let me share the document and we can jump straight to the feedback. You can keep your screen. This is a document.
Where is?
Introduction is the same. As I said, it should be short and sweet, but still good to at least tell, like, oh, what was your role? What's it? How big a team was? And you mentioned that you mostly working with CI, CD build tools. Okay, so for requirements, I would say the functional requirements are very important. So we started with, okay, we start functional requirements, but they're not important. Let's talk about non-functional and out of scope. And there are lots of things which we might have touched. So for example, when you're talking about local and global settings, how we might want how settings are defined. Do you want to define them on the backend? Do you want to define them on a client? And how would we handle, for example, versioning when different clients would just try to like redefine setting type, etc. So this part was like completely out. Then we didn't really put a scope on the library itself. Like, are we just providing the library like a business logic, or also want to provide like UI part, right? So if we do this, do we need categories? Do you need to have any kind of screens? Do we want to maintain any device-specific settings? So for example, some settings might only make a sense for a tablet, while another setting would only might have like sense for a phone, etc. So like this part could be covered as well, because otherwise we don't really know what we're building, right? So I guess this is just duplication. Like if we're talking about devices, it's always good to say, okay, what's the API version support? How far would we want to go? And at this point, I would say maybe for Android, API level 19 is a good rule of thumb, but you can bring it up and basically just discuss. So a bit of context, like in this case, we have an L5 candidate. So I would not go to all kind of like stuff, more like strategic as L6. It's more like closer to the metal, like more on the technical side of things. So API version support might be a good topic as well. So you brought up security, which is good, right? And you said, okay, we're going to be having like encryption and stuff. The point is we're building a third-party library, so we can't really know all the use cases. So imagine that we try to encrypt everything, right? And encryption is not free. It comes with the CPU cost and device. So like, why would you want to do it in a general case? Like one way to do that, let our users configure it. So as a developer, I said, okay, I'm going to create this settings library instance and said, okay, I want to encrypt all the settings, or I want to encrypt it on setting basis. So for example, we only have like one setting, which is which might be sensitive. Like, I don't know, maybe like your bank account number, for example, when it stores this, etc. So like when we're talking about libraries, it should be as flexible as possible without overcomplicated design as well. So we try to like mediate between complexity and the cost of running this thing on device. Because if your library is not very performant, most likely it's going to be taken out on any kind of like performance evaluation in the like we touched about multiple accounts and device, which I mentioned, and you didn't put it in your list, and we kind of didn't touch this too much, but for me it was kind of important stuff. Some other things which we might have touched: data size. Like, what's the volume of settings we're trying to store, right? Is it like multiple kilobytes, or was it like megabytes, whatever? That's good to know when you're trying to design something like this. Also, for third-party library, it's tricky, but you might want to have some kind of like ceiling, just to know like what you might be dealing with in the future. Data synchronization frequency. Once again, for third-party library, it's very hard to say. Do we need real time? Do we need to have eventual consistency, etc.? When we're talking about any kind of like task management, like deferred execution, it really depends like what libraries you're going to be using and what API versions you're using, because it's very buggy in certain versions. And when you bring up, for example, a third-party library, in the third-party library, there's lots of like licensing, binary compatibility, and lots of other stuff which you might don't really want to do. Well, you mentioned that there's a trade-off about third-party library and in-house development. So that was a good point, but you should always remember that third-party library might cause you some issues. Online offline support, we didn't really touch it like in our requirements. And I would say that's important in terms of like what you're going to be storing on device. How would you synchronize it, and what's going to be the single source of truth? So maybe you want to synchronize everything to local storage and then have a memory cache between local storage and user. So that would be good to cover. And also like clearing settings, like what exactly we're going to be doing when we clear in settings, how we update backend. So as you can see, the task is very, very simple, but we can bring so many like additional like details, which can steer the discussion in any direction possible. High-level design took a bit longer than anticipated. You're starting with putting account boxes, right? And it was completely like obvious. Like, let's put it this way, it was not clear what exactly those boxes represent. As a companions, would they just present data pieces? And also, we got a huge box on the right for represent backend, and we never really got to this part. And that was out of scope. So, like, I would not do too much of drawing because it takes time. Okay, so this is coming back to Stripy library, and you mentioned long-term support and trade-offs. This is good. Yeah, this is what we want to do. You also ask like, okay, do you think we should do this and this or this? Like, even if you're not like a staff level candidate, I would still try to drive conversation more. Offer functionality, negotiate. So basically you said, okay, I want to do this. And an interviewer can push back or you can push back. So it's like a more dynamic process than just trying to get everything, like every possible piece from the interviewer. Another advantage of suggesting passes, like any particular pass you want to take, is that you can steer conversation to areas we are most strong with. So for example, you don't know much about encryption, right? So you can say, okay, I don't know much about encryption, but we can talk about this one. And what if we do this? You can use it for your advantage. Then we kind of stumble upon this global local settings storage, and I still don't understand why exactly we try to separate it. It might be good to have a single source of truth, and basically from the point of view of a user, like a library user, you have two options. You just like completely obscure local or global source for the setting, things you use an API call, like a synchronous API call, or you may provide like a separate stuff. Okay, so this is going to be global setting. That means that if you build a custom UI, you might want to show some kind of like connecting stuff. And for example, for local setting, you know that the call going to be like so fast, so we don't even need to blink like those like spinning wheels, etc. So I'm still not sure why this separation is possible, but if you select this, you should be like very, very clear and make sure that interviewer understands like why would you like take this path or another. For synchronization, like same, we quickly jump to like one size fits all for deferred synchronization, which might not work for every case. One way you can approach it, okay, so now when you create a setting, you would specify, this is a real-time setting. This is like eventually consistent setting, right? Or imagine like quality of services, or quality of service. I need this immediately. I need it to have as soon as possible, and I need eventually to sync the setting, right? And make like gives us choice to library consumer, and this way you don't need to like do a real-time synchronization for everything. Then for batch collection, yeah, this part is tricky because when you try to overcomplicate your design, with just trying to budge them, trying to figure out what's going to be the best user experience. One way of doing that, once again, put it on the shoulder of library developer. So if library developer wants to synchronize everything when setting string is closed, that's an option. If they want to do it right away, that's another option. But the idea, the less of these choices you make as developer yourself, and the easier your approach is going to be, because you don't know the general case. You may put like very, very complex solution, which would never work. And as you can see, like other approaches like blocking UI or making it user configured might not be bad. I do agree with throttling. So we can put some throttling values and basically, okay, if a setting, like you would wait some time before actually just setting up setting change or trying to synchronize. So for example, you can write the change to the disk right away, but wait, I don't know, maybe a couple of settings, and you can make it configurable. You can make it configurable on the library front, or just have some kind of like remote configuration flags, etc. The way, like why I ask you to talk about developer facing API, I want to think if you would like to use synchronous versus asynchronous API, right? Because if you said, okay, I'm going to be using synchronous API, and every time you try to read the setting or write a setting, it might require a disk write. And this is a blocking call, blocking IO call. And this is the stuff which causes NR, especially if you have lots of shared preferences and they were going to be all written in bulk. You might get in trouble, like it's going to be NR crashes, etc. So being able to understand this and provide a clean API. So for example, you may not want to use RxJava, but on the other side, like you can provide an extension library, which would expose RxJava types, and it would fit really well, like whatever design you have. We can provide callbacks, etc. It's very easy to see the thought process about like how convenient you want this library to be, or would you like to use coroutines, for example, right? And if you use Kotlin, like how would that play well with Java, especially if we're talking about asynchronous code. Conflict resolution, there is no right answer here. Like no matter what you offer, there's going to be some drawbacks. I would personally take one of these ways, be like server has authority. So like last come, last serve. I don't know how to put it. So the call which comes last, for example, override setting. It's the easiest strategy for conflict resolution possible. Another way, if you want to be something more clever, but at the same time you're a third-party library, so you don't know about application use case, why wouldn't you just provide a callback for a developer? So there might be a callback that said, okay, this is your current setting, this is your new setting, merge them, right? And developer can do it, and the user would never even know about it. Any setting might be changing. So yeah, in terms of overall feedback, be mindful of the time. So as you see, high-level design took a lot of time, and mostly because we just stumbled like on one thing, on like this storage local versus global. What I would do is say, okay, this is storage. And if we want to talk more about it, we can talk more about it. Like this is pretty much for everyone I interview with. Be more assertive in what solutions you pick, right? So offer solutions, don't ask too many questions. Don't just throw stuff on the table. You said, okay, for example, we need storage. We can put database files or key value storage by platform. And now database, like, oh, we probably don't need because we don't need querying functionality. Plain files, well, it's easier to encrypt, decrypt, stuff like that, but it's an overhead. Then we said, okay, maybe we're going to be using like shared preferences and just encode something, or maybe we're going to be using like data store or any other library, like any other third-party solution which offers us functionality we need out of the box. So we can start with that, and then if we have any trouble, we can always migrate. So it's like trade-off between time to the market, which you mentioned, and like long-term support and compatibility. Yeah, and I would try to be like more concise on how you express your thoughts. Like don't go too many details. Just okay, this, and this. look at your interviewer and see like the facial expression. And you may ask question like if that makes sense. So for example, I'm going to be like doing this and I'm going to go this direction. Like, would that make sense? For example, there says like, nah, that would not work for this particular reason. Or if they said, yeah, sure. And first thing you do, you like play the devil's advocate. You say, okay, what can go wrong? Like for what I do, what's the worst thing that can happen? And it's probably like a very good time to bring it up. So for example, I'm going to be using like this synchronization. I'm going to be using socket. And what if my connection is like really, really spotty? What if just like a user driving a car on the freeway? What do we do? So there's just so many ways you can go, and there's like not one size that fits all, but it's all about signals. So yeah, this is my high-level feedback, and with this in mind, I would invite the audience so we can press this reactions button and select raise hand and Jin speak. Anyone? Okay, Arman.
Hi again. So one thing that is not very clear to me right now is, so later below this, in your feedback, you said that blocking UI is a bad approach. I'm not quite clear on that. So is it because it's under the batch processing stuff? Or
I'm not
what?
sure if I understand the question. So
it says here, it's the blocking UI interaction is a bad approach. I don't think so in this case, right? Because if we wanted to make like instant synchronization with the backend, like so consistency first, and blocking UI would make sense, I think.
So
is that clear?
Bad approach, it probably my notes for. So Sergey said, okay, we can probably block UI, but probably it's bad approach. And said, oh, it could be user confused. So this is not this is just my notes. And I kind of agree that, so imagine like you flip something and now it's gray. And network request going, and it's gray. And you try to go to the back and what's the head? Something broke. And now you're pissed, right? So I would say it's good when you do everything in terms of opportunistic state. So a good idea, a good example. So when you're browsing,
when you say opportunistic, do you mean domestic? Sorry.
Opportunistic, that means that the user experience goes like you always connected, even if you're offline. So for example, you can switch the setting and user would see it right away and would see the result right away. But then it's going to be up to the library.
It depends on the use case.
Yeah.
So sometimes you may want to synchronize all the time, and that will be easier to implement as well. So when you're synchronizing between different clients, if you synchronize to the backend immediately by blocking the UI and waiting for the response from the server, then you never need to kind of merge any conflicts. It's always going to be up to date, basically, right?
What might be tricky is in the third-party library, you would never know about the use case, right? So like if you don't know, you can always make it configurable. So you define a setting and you said, okay, this is a high priority stuff, which should block everything. And if you like from the point of view developer, so we have two options. We can provide UI, which kind of tricky because how well would this UI blend with the whole stuff, right? Or we can say, okay, you can build yourself, but like here's a call, here's a callback. And for example, if the library user, the developer decides that, oh, I want to block the switch, so they can do it. So you can do it in a callback. So you switch it off or switch it on. Now it's blocked, and when callbacks fires, it's like, okay, now I can unblock it.
I guess it also might depend on what kind of settings these are, what kinds of accounts these are. If this is like a Google account library, then we are Google, right? We are the developers of the Google account, and etc. So we decide how exactly we want to synchronize. But if this is just like a generic account settings library, so the developer of the application would use it. Like, I'm not sure if that's a good use case actually. Why wouldn't the developer just of the application develop their own solution for this? If this is like a commonly used account, then this makes sense, but otherwise it doesn't really. Is that clear?
Yeah.
What I'm trying to say is
the tricky part, like this is a third-party library. So you may have your account, like whatever app you have, and you can just like link the setting to this account. So for example, you can store like your account ID and make them basically like one-to-one bijection. The whole point, like imagine we're not trying to build a product here. We're trying to extract signal from a candidate. And the signal is if a candidate wants to force like one size fits it all approach on everyone, which is this is generally not a good approach. Or B, like the candidate shows like lots of flexibility and they can see lots of this like tricky use cases, like which you should mention. Okay, so what kind of account? How would that? So lots of questions you can ask and basically like expand the problem. But if you just like, oh, I'm going to be blocking UI, it's like, like the candidate didn't really think it through. But you got good points, and this is exactly what I've been expecting. But remember, it's much easier when you're a spectator. If you don't believe me, like I'm happy to have you next time. So did it answer the question?
Yeah, I think so.
We're looking for signal. We're not trying to build a system. We're trying to see the candidate's thought process, like what problems they bring up, like what trade-offs, like how flexible they were their solutions, like what else they bring. So you brought up, okay, what this account is. We never discussed like what exactly we mean by account.
One more thing that's kind of, you mentioned that if we use async calls for the developer API, then we kind of run the risk of getting ANRs.
Yep.
I'm not sure why that would be the case if we used like extra threads for async calls, right?
No. So synchronous calls. So synchronous call would block until you write. So imagine you have GLN settings, right? And your app is already doing something. So it's already like UI heavy or on some, like, I don't know, layouts.
In this case, if maybe sync code then would be something like what you say opportunistic state. So synchronously just call the function and it's going to be doing its work in the background. But the developer API is going to be synchronous. So just call setting and then the library is going to just run in the background.
Yeah, in terms of developer, you said, okay, I make a call and then I assume that it works, right? And then you might have a callback said, okay, now it actually done. Like some stuff we can do, like when you change something, like it switches right away, but then it's like kind of gray. So you can like make it back and forth. So instead of just like showing a spinner or like blinking, it becomes gray. It's still active, but then when it's synchronized, it's not great anymore. Or if you ever use WhatsApp, you send something. It's like one checkbox means like, okay, you send it locally. That means you can keep sending messages, but then it's like two checkboxes means, okay, now it's delivered. But what I mean by opportunistic state is that the user should never be blocked by any kind of like asynchronous operations, like writes, reads, etc. For in terms of user experience, like everything happens like instantly, even if it's not the case. But that's what makes the app feels more responsive.
Got it.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, Masroor. Sorry if I mispronounced the name.
No, you said it right. Hi. So I was wondering if it would be a good idea or if it would be within scope of conversation to talk about RxJava or coroutines as an extension library or anything of the sort. Would that be something that would be, would that make sense, or would that be going too far?
I mean, it provides signal. It really depends on the candidate level. So for L5, I think it's totally viable. So
Right.
like if you write everything in Kotlin coroutines, you kind of living like Java out, right? So you make sure that your code will run on Java, Kotlin, whatever, and then you can do like KTX version of the library of the artifact,
right,
which can provide function with like suspended function, any kind of convenience stuff, or the domain specific language. Yeah, it's totally fine. It's a good signal. That means that you're thinking about like a wide range of developers.
Right. Yeah, I think because like one of the things, if you use Firebase or any of the other libraries that are available out there, they usually have a Firebase core, and there's Firebase core KTX, and then there is a Java version and with RX Java 2 or RX Java 3, and then there's a coroutines library, because I don't want the core functionality of the library to be affected by bogged down by all these other considerations and whatnot. So if we had to go back to the settings now, could we just say that, okay, I'm like, if you want to have any of these specific behaviors, like if you want to use this other frameworks like RX Java, coroutines, or anything else, can we just assume that that there is going to be another library, or do we need to delve deeper into that aspect of it and make sure that, like, as long as we make sure that the APIs that we create take that into consideration, where they're generic enough that you'd be able to leverage and you'd be able to use them in the other libraries? Would that I'm trying to make sense of that.
So basically, like, imagine you trying to discuss developer-facing API, right? So you said the basic API, for example, would accept a callback because it works everywhere. It works in Java, it works in Kotlin. Then you would say, I would also provide an artifact, like an extension which would, for example, return completable from RX Java, right? Or single, or whatever like observable type you may want, and you need to justify why exactly this type. And then for Kotlin users, you would also provide a KTX library, which would expose a suspend function. And that's it. That's all the API you want.
Right. Okay.
It's about signals, right? It's not like, oh, this API is very, very basic. So what I was looking for, would the candidate go synchronous or asynchronous? And what kind of, like, if it's asynchronous, what kind of, like, how would it be callbacks? Would it be RxJava? Would it be coroutines? Or would it be like all of this? Would they go in a single artifact? Or would they be like separated? So lots of signal here.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Okay, anyone else? Well, if not, Sergey, it's all yours. What do you think? What went well? What could be better? And what's your overall impression?
Yeah, so it was the first mock interview for me that was a bit stressy. So what I'm first thing that I saw that I'm very first switch from the third-party design to the UI design, which was not actually expected from me, as I understand. And another thing that I'm totally agree and note that I don't collect enough functional requirements. Yeah, and overall, I was a bit surprised that we will design third-party library and not a product, like an app or service, something like this. So anyways, that was so useful for me. So thank you very much. And if there are no any candidates for the next mock interview, I'm ready to be in.
Yeah, I would really love to have Arman as the next one because you got very good points. But the reason you are candidate today because you made very good points last time, right?
Yeah.
And as you can see, it's much easier to give feedback. So, what people should remember, there's a huge stress factor involved. It's not because Sergey doesn't know anything. It's because it's very stressful to go with this like real time, especially like, oh, you didn't expect to design a Stripy like a library, which like no one would tell there's going to be no library design on your interviews. It's up to the interview what to say. So you should be ready for that, right? So you should have at least some kind of like template or framework how you can address it. And remember, designing a library poses a whole new set of challenges than the product, because like you know the product, you know all the use cases, and you can make any strong assumptions on the library part of things, and it also should play nice with the app itself. So yeah,
actually, it's a little bit late for me. I have a systems design interview tomorrow. I asked for like partners in the chat, but nobody replied. Well, one person replied, but he kind of flaked a little bit. So yeah, but interesting thing. So I'm applying for a mobile developer position at Google, and the system design interview that they're suggesting is not going to be Android focused or mobile focused even. It's going to be front end focused, they said, and they didn't really clarify what it's going to be about. They just said, okay, there are going to be topics like UI design, UI frameworks, what else? Web technology, something like that. So I'm not sure. It seems like it's going to be more web front end focused, which is interesting, even if the position is Android specific. So maybe even this kind of format is not going to be useful for that. Not sure. I'll see tomorrow, I guess.
It really depends on the interviewer. So an interviewer selects the question.
Really?
Usually your recruiter cannot help much, and most of the time they're not very technical.
Well, the way she explained it to me, she said, okay, Google is hiring like general developers that can do many things, backend, front end, Android. And that's why this system design round is going to be like general as well. So it's not going to be Android focused or even mobile focused. It can be something else. But I asked them to make it front end focused so that they don't ask me like backend stuff like I don't know, data replication stuff. I'm not really familiar with that stuff.
Yeah. So
but yeah, right, even then I don't mind to be the next candidate.
Yeah, that sounds good. So basically, I can't really speak for Google, and I can't really share any of the interviewing process. But general recommendation: A, be mindful of the time. So everything you do should be like short and sweet. Don't go in lots of philosophical discussions, right? And remember, everything you say should provide a signal. So if they ask you something, try to think, why exactly is they asking this? So it's not about the solution, it's about your thought process. Well, thought process, communication, and how you can respond to stress. Like some interviewers would like to create a very stressful experience and basically like throw a bunch of questions and see how far you go. It's a personal style, right? And there is no one size fits at all, but just remember, like, try to show your like best sides.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, anyone else? No? All right. In this case, I would assume that everything else, the rest of it was perfect. And probably see you next time. All right. Thank you, guys. Take care.
Thank you, guys. See you.
Thank you. Bye.